Welcome to the GTP. My name is Scott, and I am so excited to share with you a friend of the channel and returning guest star, the one and only Mr. Wawoo, as we go ahead and we're going to count down our top 10 underrated series. So this is more just a fun challenge video, just because it's number 10 or number 5 doesn't mean it changes in the rating, but the challenge for this video was to look at MyAnimeList, and we had to find 10 titles that were outside the top 1,000 when it came to rating and popularity. So that was Mr. Wawoo and I scanning through probably numbers 1,000 all the way through probably 7 or 8 as we were looking through what are some ones that we could recommend that's from MyAnimeList outside that range that we think are underrated, that deserve to be within that top 1,000, maybe even higher, depending what you hear. And again, I just want to say this is for fun. Don't take offense to these series. And if you're like, why isn't this in MyAnimeList in the top 100? That's a great question, and you can rate it or let your other friends know. My guess with this list, as animes come out, new volumes, and after you hear the gorgeous words out of Mr. Wawoo, these things are going to skyrocket and they won't even be in the 1,000. So we will timestamp this for this video. So when you see it launch, this was currently in the 1,000. I could see a lot of these changing after, especially hearing from our expert extraordinary here. And Mr. Wawoo is really good with sharing hidden gem series. Some of those my favorite series I've read were ones that he has recommended to me that I've never heard of before. And because we can't get Mr. Wawoo doing more YouTube for us, I was able to get him on the channel so that he can at least share with us audience. So I'm excited to go through this. You're going to want to stick to the end, as there's going to be many things you probably haven't heard of or completely under your radar. If you want to skip my talking every time Mr. Wawoo go, I give you permission to do that.
Thanks. Appreciate the kind words. Looking forward to it. Happy New Year to you. Hope you had good holidays as well. And glad to be back here to sharing it. I'm excited to see what you got as well. And, hopefully everybody else enjoys what we've got to share between each other.
Hopefully they do. All right, so I'm going to kick us off then with number 10, and I did cheat a little bit. I apologize. 2 of my titles are manhwas, and the first one's going to be a manhwa, and at least all mine that I have, I own, and I have read. I mean, that would be weird to recommend something you haven't read. But so my first one is going to be What's Wrong with Secretary Kim. There's 6 volumes total. The Eyes Press line, part of the Yen Press, they're the ones that just finished the last one. This is about a secretary that she's going to be turning 30, and she's just single and has worked her whole life for this guy, and she's just done, and the person's extremely arrogant, and she decides that she's just going to quit and then just try to figure out her life on her own. And then, of course, the stunning CEO chairman isn't going to have none of that, where all of a sudden he realizes how attached he is to her, and oh, maybe I haven't been treating her as well, and she's been working me for, I think, for at least the last 7 to 9 years. I can't have that. You need to stay with me. And now he's trying to swoo her in his narcissistic, arrogant way of slowly realizing that he's not as amazing as he thinks, just stunning around. He thinks, I've done so much for you. Why would you quit and leave me? And then you get to follow that journey along and then see it's a Korean drama. I'm sure there's probably a live action for it that did very well in Korea, but it's one that I've actually enjoyed, and I was surprised to see it was out of the top 1,000.
How recent is that? Is that a new one or?
I mean, it's completed, so I don't. It's a lot, probably in the last couple of years. I mean, again, there's only 6 total. I think it was originally on Webtoon, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I was actually surprised to see that for something, especially it's completed, that it was outside of that range.
Very cool. Well, go ahead and go for my number 10, if you will, if that's okay. I was actually really surprised about this just because it's a older series. Like a lot of my chef friends are aware of this and they don't read any manga in general. They just know historically a lot of chefs have either read it or food reviewers, critics have read it as well. And that's Ocean Bow a la carte. Have you ever read that series before?
No, I'm just happy that I was thinking, oh, one of those outside the 1,000, at least on one was Food Wars. I'm like, oh, please don't let it be Food Wars.
No, and it's a classic older series, and they kind of separate it into like different parts of Japanese food culture. So like sake has one, Ramen, gyoza has its own. So, different types of foods. And what's really interesting is a lot of it's connected to actual real, legends in food culture in Japan as well, which is super cool. Um, and like in the case of the ramen one, where I happen to live in United States on this far wonderful Northeast coast, uh, we have a ramen shop that we go to, a friend, and his mentor that he learned from, it's this guy Kiezo who had ramen in New York City. He invented the ramen burger. It was like a big United States thing in 2010s. And his, uh, I guess, mentor that he learned from in Japan is one of the ones who's in the Oshinbo. So there's like this nice little lineage that's kind of coming through that we've accidentally, my wife and I, have been able to like experience. And then, I saw the book in their kitchen as well. And the chef was like, yeah, yeah. He's like, I'm just, I don't read any manga whatsoever. I just love ramen. And this was given to me by somebody else who knew, and so on and so on. So that lineage is really cool, but it's a little bit older series. I would say like the art is like similar to like that Barefoot Gen kind of older style, so a little bit more bubbly characters, the Astro Boy style, if you will. But I just really like the way that they capture food like authentically, go through the history of it. And I was actually really shocked it wasn't higher up because like Barefoot Gen's in the top 200, and that's a historical piece. But I guess that has a little bit more international weight probably than Oshinbo, but pretty good release. You can probably see it at Barnes and Nobles when you walk by. It's one of the series that looks like Saint Young Men, same kind of like white with simple primary colors on the side. Looks pretty, and it's good on the inside. Makes me hungry.
Well, I'm definitely going to be picking it up, which is always hurtful when I'm with you, as I seem to buy more and more manga. So probably after this, we'll be pulling it up. So that is awesome. Thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah.
Going on to number 9. This is from Ablaze. They're the ones that brought it over. We have 3 volumes total so far. It keeps getting pushed. I think it's supposed to be done already. This would have made my top 10 of new releases last year originally, but I wasn't aware of the series until lovely Tony's Manga shared the series with me, and that is called Centaurs. This is a story about where the humans and the centaurs exist, and then centaurs are being captured by humans and then put into almost this version of slavery. Very sad, where you'll see the centaurs where they'll end up even removing their arms and using them as just manual labor. And then you're following this one centaur gets captured, and then he escapes, and as he's going, he's being hunted by the humans. A very fast pace. I really appreciate it. I think there's six volumes total for this one. And then even by the second volume, it's almost like a time skip how much just happens in that, and then the third volume alone. So I really appreciated that the pacing. It makes you think of just how things were before, but in our own lives. But I think it's really interesting when we use fantasy as a way to describe a story, kind of like where, if I break down Lord of the Rings with Tolkien, if you look at, Frodo and Samwise, originally it's really a story of how do you deal with a friend that has mental illness. But
Mhm.
instead, by having this idea of a ring and just corrupting him, and how do I stay, loyal to somebody even though they're acting strange and weird. You have the same thing where I think I love that what fantasy does is taking a tough topic about taking people, enslaving them, treating them rough, and the horrible
Mhm.
things that happen. But the idea of taking with using centaurs, I think, has been a really interesting dynamic with that, and just really makes you think. So just a very good fantasy story. I was blown away by the first volume alone. Again, that would be in
Mhm.
my top 10 of last year of new releases just with the first volume.
Wow. Blaze is one of those publishers too that there was that I think there was like that chess was one of like their first ones that they released, something chess master or chess blaze, whatever. And that was the first time seeing that publisher. And I just keep hearing more about it, not just from you, from other people too. So that sounds really fascinating. I really like that idea of the centaurs. Makes sense, half horse. I can see imagine where things are going with the story. So that's really interesting. I might have to add that one to my list. Thank you. All right, for my number 9, I don't even know if this counts as cheating, but I was kind of surprised how far out it is in ranked. So in ranked, it's closer to like 20,000. which is surprising because its first version of the series is in the top like 200. And that's Gantz G. So that
Mm.
was published in English by Dark Horse. They continued on, doing from the original Gantz, and Horioku does Gantz G as well. And have you ever read Gantz before? I can't remember if we talked about this once. Have you
I've read
dived
the
into Gantz?
first three volumes. I recently got it thanks to you,
Mm,
that incredible sale, and I'm like, well, it's only going to get more expensive. So I just got it.
yeah.
I blame you.
It's honestly, it's Gantz is one of my favorite series of all time. I think I've reread that an uncomfortable amount of times. The number is definitely grown. I can speed through it now, which is terrible. So I'll sit down and like read the whole thing in maybe a day. It's just I just find something very captivating about it, and I really like the way, almost like Shuzo Oshimi, Blood on the Tracks, where they use the story to kind of talk about deeper stuff. So even though like you were talking about fantasy, Gantz is a wonderful sci-fi that dives into the neuroses, and I really love like how they look at the population public at large, reflecting on this whole sci-fi adventure with the main characters. But long story longer, Gantz G um, takes the story of the first arc and flips it in a different scenario. So it's a female protagonist. All the people from the first series are kind of maybe a different gender, looking somewhat similar. So it's like supposed to be this other timeline of how all those things happen in Gantz in the beginning can and are different with a female protagonist who also has to step up with their own challenges. Um, and it's really interesting that Gantz G is only 3 volumes. It's pretty short. Unfortunately, it's out of print, so it's a little bit harder to find the physical of. If you're lucky in Mercari, you can find all 3 for under 100. Um, and then also now Gantz E is really starting to pick up steam, which is Gantz that happens during the Endo period with like samurais and stuff. And they just hit a really weird part right now that's kind of mind boggling. So it's really interesting to see, spoiler alert, how they're all connected, which is interesting. So I think Gantz G is a good read. People give Gantz a read, and it's a little bit challenging. Some parts are a little difficult. Definitely mature. So if you're under 18, highly recommend. Probably not unless you're ready for some real content, if you will. Same with Gantz G, but I don't know, something about it. The sci-fi adventure, that story is so gripping and interesting. I just can't stop. That's why I like it, Gantz G.
Thanks. I need to finish Gantz first. But like you said, definitely not for kids. There are some very cringy moments, at
Mm-hmm.
least for me. But as I try to, as long as it's not permanent or a majority of it, it's not as bad. Just it depends on the person. You just have to realize that you're going into something that can have some very shocking or cringy things. Um, just I guess some books you just can flip through a couple of those pages, or fast forward some things in a movie, or turn away real quick. But if the story overall grips you and has that, and if you can look past some of that stuff, but for some people, I know it's also part of the story itself is some of those cringe elements. So, yeah, I did not realize the alternative with that. So that's really interesting. Once I finish Gantz, to be
Yeah.
able to see those other ones as well to get a full perspective.
Yeah. And then just to add to what you're saying too, like for Gantz, a lot of people forget too, like us being United States, we put our United States brain with reading the content when we also have to remember a lot of the cultural things that they talk and bring about are actually very challenging and different in the Japanese culture as well. So I always find that interesting too. When like certain scenes, big scenes happen, I'm like, oh yeah, we interpret this differently because we're in the United States. We're over there. It's akin to a movie dissociated from reality, but also their perspective on our United States thought points for certain points of the story. So very interesting. I love it. Good head case. I've done a lot of reading about it.
That's a good perspective. That sounds like a great video for you to share in the future.
Oh God, yeah. I might have to do just like a Twitch live stream or something and just talk about it for 8 hours. To go another 3 volume short series is actually another Dark Horse publish out of print called Mail. And I've done like a little bit of like a my first short I ever tried doing, believe it or not, like I think last year was on this series. It's really hard for me to find like a horror series that I find that's not like boring. I don't know why, but it's so hard in manga to like translate that towards me as like a horror kind of a thing. Um, but like something like Summertime Rendering, I think that makes a lot of sense for me in that horror thriller aspect. MPD Psycho, just on that content. But I digress. Either way, uh, one of my favorite underrated series is Mail, and it's a 3 volume short series, Dark Horse, out of print, and it's this wonderful, interesting story about this detective who's got, I think it's called like a Kagurasuchi, so it's like a special weapon item that he uses to kind of exercise ghosts and monsters and that kind of thing. So this private eye investigator goes through these different stories. Um, what's great about the volume, it's like they're all little short stories for the chapters. They don't truly deeply interconnect. So if you're trying to buy it physically and you're in like in the aftermarket, you could probably pick up volume 3 and be fine reading it. Same with volume 2 or just volume 1. But the main character is always there, but not much truly connects procedurally. Like you would assume, like there's an arc in volume 1. It's just the main character going through different, calls for investigation. But it's really interesting. I think it's really cool. Um, it actually is gripping, even though they're short stories. But I don't know. I like that one. I think it's really underrated. Not a lot of people have it. I think I was introduced to it by a former manga tuber, Sarate Productions, and uh, he was just talking about it, and he's like, "It's short, pick it up." And I was like, "All right, deal," and loved it. Can't put it down. It's great.
And I'm sure all of us right now have paused the video to go and pick it up as well. So thank you again, as always. My number 8 probably will not stay number 8. I think the anime is coming out soon for this, and this is a Trillion Game.
Mm.
The third volume's about to come out for it. It's definitely not for kids. Just like with Gantz, there's just some of the scenes, but I do like it. Overall, it's interested. You're following the journey of two people who have nothing, and their goal is to get $1 trillion and to buy out a company that rejected one of the two people. What
Mm.
I appreciate and what I like about the series on a side note is they do some teaching about owning corporations and stock market on business, which I have a business background, so I find that a bit entertaining. But I like the idea where, like, for example, when they're interviewing employees, it's one person says, "Hey, it's not necessarily about getting the right answer. It's about is it really like a mixer, and do I want to work with this person?" So I like some of those elements in between it of looking at the importance of not just smarts, but also having a relationship end, which I think is really key. And then often at times I got it like you can teach people skills, but is that somebody I want to work with is so key. So, as if I can find someone skills, but also cool and I like hanging out with them, that's a win-win. So I
Yeah.
appreciate them going through some of the zaniness with that, as well as trying to see them one person just trying to make as many shortcuts as possible and BS his way through everything, and somehow a lot of it works and is just entertaining. Of like, we don't have a prayer to win, so one person decides to go into the competition as a Shinto priest just to throw people off and distract them as his friends trying to win this hacking competition. So it's fun. You're watching them go from zero to eventually there's flash forwards where you get to see where they're at now, where they do get that $1 trillion, where you're seeing them along the way, what that looks like. And then trying to also have that freedom where, do I have freedom versus control is another narrative in this is, I could have a lot more freedom and do what I want with the company, or have somebody over it where there's more control, but I'm where there's more safety, there's more money involved. So that tension of like, do I want to be more risky and have the freedom to do what I want versus having control, but then I have less freedom.
Wow. I know that Trillion Game is I was looking over as you started talking. I was like, yeah, that was in my last Merry Manga haul. Actually, from the end of the year, I actually got Trillion Game, and I'm slowly starting to see it bubble up. So I really agree with you. I think that one's definitely going to get big, once that starts coming through with a little more popularity with people. But I'm shocked there's a little bit more in the Otsuka because I thought they had a bigger following in general. Where was it ranked? Was it in the thousands, if you will, in the on the list,
I
or
yeah, it was in between 1000 and 2000, and it was the same on popularity and rated, which was hard because there's series that were rated terribly,
mm,
as you know, and then it was very popular.
yeah, yeah,
So which is interesting to see what people were either review bomb or they did not like it, but then it was everybody. It's extremely popular and people love it, and there's things that would be, rated or very popular, but vice versa.
yeah. That's good. That gives me some exciting, energy to want to dive into that and read that. I got like a good list for the new year, looking to try to read a little bit more. So appreciate the insight in that because I'll dive into it. So then I'll go along with that energy and a series that is still in print slash maybe out of stock in the earlier. This one also is right in that 1,000 area. I knew it was going to be close, but I figured with how lame the reprint process is that it would probably just be outside. Um, and it's a shoujo beat classic, Kaze Hikaru. A lot of people are afraid to dive into it just because the release schedule is terrible for English. It's already completed in Japan. It's been completed for a long time. I think Viz decides to print one new volume a year every August. And it's kind of tragic because it's a great series. They don't reprint a lot of the older ones. So like I think now like 1 through 10, I'm just looking at it over there, are pretty heavily out of stock, kind of hard to find. But you can find a lot of people who are selling it for MSRP, which is great online, just because they don't want to wait every year for a new one. I think we're up to actually volume 34 right now in English print. But it's a really great story. It does finish, I think, around 42. So maybe in 5 to 10 years, we'll finish the English printing cycle. Uh, but no, it's a really great story. There's a little bit of that whole samurai in between. The main character. Uh, they tell you in the first chapter is females trying to disguise as a male to be a part of a samurai life and culture. So you can kind of, us American audiences will kind of attribute that to like, oh, like kind of Mulan, a little bit of that understanding. But it's really good, wholesome, great series. Can't complain. It's a classic for a reason. And I was actually really shocked because it does have an anime as well. So I thought it'd be, a little bit higher, but pleasantly surprised that it's just outside that window of 1,000. But yeah, I can't recommend it enough. It's a really good classic series. If you can find the first 10 physical, great. If not, I think you can get it online and follow along. But the new printing cycle is very bizarre, so it's worth it though. I think it's a great series.
All right, and then my number 7 will be a little cheating, and if there is a crossover at all, this is going to be the crossover. But this is Talk to My Back. This was actually recommended to me from Mr. Wawoo himself, and then I immediately picked it up, and it was a great, just almost like a one shot where they have it complete. Very, very good. Seeing through the life of a Japanese wife, just seeing it through, I think, the 80s, just her perspective of, having to be a homemaker and then trying to make ends meet, was like going back to work, raising two boys, having a husband that's kind of helpful but kind of not, and I'm with this person, and he's not necessarily he's not the greatest guy in the world, but he's also not worse. He's just a average, mundane husband for the most part, and just seeing her life and going through. And then what I appreciate is just you see as the kids grow up as well. So it's not just one time period, but you're seeing
Yeah.
overall as she's growing herself and developing her own personality through the years, and as people change, friendships and relationship changes. I just thought it was a very, very good, interesting series, and you can read it in a day. But even though it's an older artwork, I did appreciate what they did, and just the breakthroughs of the author itself. Just a female author in that day was
Yeah.
very unheard of, and for her to share her story, because at least from what I understand from even the culture and time frame, is that during that time is women, it's almost dishonored for you to speak and give your opinion back then. So let alone create a story where you're sharing your perspective. I just thought it was so powerful.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's such a wonderful release. It's actually which side, if I'm doing it right? Right there. Yeah, perfect point. I think that's such a great release from Drawn and Quarterly too. It's beautiful, um, and I agree with all those. I love that series. It's so good. All right, great. For number 6, I have Topu GP. Uh, this is a really good series. It reminded me a lot of like Initial D and how Initial D created this whole intrigue and interest in car culture. It's one of those things where if you've never read the manga or cared about cars for Initial D, you probably don't assume it's good. And then you dive into it and you're like, well, shoot, the art is fascinating. I'm learning a lot about this whole sport of drifting and the culture. And Topu GP does exactly that. So it's based on the main character, Topu. And GP is actually the GP moto. So the motorcycle racing. It's one of those things like Formula One. I know of it, but I've never cared to watch it. Um, but now that I've read this series, it's the same manga as Oh My Goddess. Like it's so well done. I've learned a lot about MotoGP I never thought I would learn before. And every time I get a new volume that comes in English, it's the first thing I do. I rip it open. I go, oh my goodness, it's here. And I immediately stop what I'm doing and read it. It's just one of those series. It's quick, it's enjoyable. You can reread it, same as Initial D. There's a decent amount of good plot, but then a lot of actual motion in the storytelling with, the racing. It's a really great, fantastic series. I actually don't really know if it's finished yet or not, but I was also really surprised. It's super far out in the ranking and the popularity. It's like in the 10,000s higher. And I just assumed because Oh My Goddess is, a legendary series that everyone loves for and it's art. I just presumed it'd be higher up, but I guess not people have found it yet. So if you're looking for something, interesting like Initial D or Yowamushi Pedal that gets you kind of hooked into a new sport or new world in reality you never thought of, Tobu GP is fantastic. I mean, it's so good. It's fantastic.
That's interesting because I haven't read, but I know of it, and I know a lot of people know about the series,
Mm.
but for some reason, just because you know it, for some reason, people didn't decide just to pick it up. So I'm very surprised it's outside the top 10,000.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's because I think they do a weird reprint schedule. Like they had the first 3 volumes reprinted pretty frequently, and then now that it's kind of clipped past the 10 volumes, the last reprint I think was like a year and a half ago for volume 1. So I almost wonder if maybe that's where the apprehension's coming from. Not a lot of people are trying it because they can't get volume 1, but I've seen it on the, aftermarket, pretty comparable. It's one of the taller like Viz Sig size series. I think it's Seven Seas that publishes it. Might be wrong. When you put
Yeah.
it up, it'll be there, but highly recommend it. It's great. It's so enjoyable.
Awesome. Thank you so much for hearing. My number 6, I apologize if I butcher the name, Togi Oni. This is from Yen Press. The 5th volume just came out. The first couple volumes are in shrink wrap. I didn't understand why they're in shrink wrap, but the first volume didn't need shrink wrap. But then after it goes on, you're like, oh, okay, now I understand why some of it's shrink wrap. And
Mm.
even though it says not for kids at first, parental discretion advised, I was like, oh, this is weird. It didn't seem this way, but now I understand a little bit why. This is a series had taking place, I think, in the Edo period in Japan, where we have our lovely a girl who's about to be sacrificed to one of the gods, one of the Shinto gods, and then she ends up being saved. And then, so this is a world where the gods still exist, and then their powers are based off of how many people worship them. And then you're following, she is saved, and she's following this guy on his journey, as well as there is another there's an Oni as well with them who's trying to not partake in the Oni ways, and you're following them just on the journey itself as they go to these different places and then helping these villages with the different type of gods they're dealing with, whether that's for the moon or for a harvest or it's very,
Mm.
I was very surprised. So the gods also have their own world. So it reminds me a little bit like a Greek mythology where that you can enter the gods' world, kind of like on
Gotcha.
Mount
Yeah.
Olympus. So they all have their own place as well, where they look different than they do in real life. There's some time traveling involved as well. The artwork was really interesting, I thought, for this series. So I was very surprised. Thoroughly enjoying it, so I'm surprised. I bought it because I thought the cover looked interesting for the first volume, and I've continued to stay with it. So again, only 5 volumes out so far, at least in English. I was surprised how much I enjoyed the series, just following their journey to find out what's going to happen. There's a good arc right now that don't want to spoil, but you get to see more of the one of the main characters, not the girl, but the guy. You get to see his side of things, and also what's how the idea that you could become your own god and what you have to do for that, and just the idea of getting so far on your journey and at the very end choosing to change based off of seeing one thing you think you could turn one way and be one type of person, and one act or one situation of seeing through someone else's lens could mutually completely change your path and your destination. So I've enjoyed the journey so far.
For my halfway point, number five is the series Shonen Note Boy Soprano. My real life job is a music teacher for a high school. I've always, my main instrument was a voice, even though I do violin, piano, guitar. And believe it or not, for music education, you have to learn how to play every main instrument too to graduate. So, like, some knowledge of that, all the other stuff is there. But Shonen Note, I just assumed I'd be interested in. I was trying to find something. I remember when I was trying to look for a new series, like I loved Blue Giant. I think I begged you for a year straight to get into Blue Giant. It's, a captivating series like that. And it took some while to find stuff in English. You have Your Lie in April, a couple of out of print series, and then found Shonen Note, decided to give it a try. And holy smokes, the art blew my mind. There's a lot of moments where it captures really well what it's like to be a musician, and you kind of like lose yourself in the music. So they do a really good job of capturing this whole like performance, losing yourself in the performance, that kind of helps those who maybe aren't musicians but kind of realize that something magical happens with music, kind of puts it in a better perspective. I would say it's like almost, if you've ever seen, Ratatouille, and in the beginning, Remy is talking to his friend about, oh, if you mix this flavor with this, these pop of colors combine. And, his friend tries it and he's like, nah, I just want to eat food. But you kind of get a good visual glimpse. And I think Shonen no Boy Soprano does a great job of capturing that. I mean, it's got an amazing story too. And, I don't know if I have an advantage for being a musician itself, but, going through everything, I don't really think you need to have a music background to get it. They do a really good job explaining it, workshopping the story of our main character, his family, his friends. And it's a really good story about like finding your confidence and finding who you are. And as these students are doing it as music as a vehicle. But it's a great series. I think at most 10 volumes, but I love it. It's one of those, same thing as like Tuba GP, when it comes in English, new volume, rip it open, dive through it, and then I kind of sit there, think about my life a little bit. But it's a really great series. Highly recommend for anyone who wants to try something new.
That's great. I mean, most of these are all going to be new to somebody.
I hope so. I mean, I'm learning a lot overall, so this is good. I like it.
All right, so my number five, I was actually surprised this was out of the top 1,000. This was another Tony's manga she recommended, Dementia 21. This Fantagraphics did this. They did this collector's volume, which I think you get on Amazon. I've seen for around $30, so I think is a steal for the collector's edition. But very, very zany indeed, where you're following the perspective of a girl who is a care worker for the elderly, and just seeing her having to go and she's wanting to do the best job possible. And then, so people don't like that she keeps getting number one, so they end up giving her the worst case is terrible. And then it just these hilarious situations, a lot of dark humor. So, for an example, all these elderly people have escaped and they're out in the forest. So, what they do is they create a waiting room in the forest, and all of a sudden it's like a bird feeder. All these old people are like, "Oh, a waiting room," and
That's
they
amazing.
they sit. All of a sudden they're sitting down, and there's a magazine, and that's how they're able to get get them all back. It's creating
Whoa.
a waiting room.
As
Like they're
funny as
gonna
that
see
is,
a doctor.
I'm laughing because I'm pretty sure that is a technique that some dementia wards actually really use to get people to sit around. I think I remember, like, they have a fake bus stop to,
Yeah.
if they try to like
Yep.
walk away, that they sit at the bus stop. No bus is coming, but it keeps them. Wow, that's fascinating.
Yeah, and I mean, yeah, there's some very, very zany things, a little bit of horror elements at times, um, with it where, and again, you're like kaiju will show up in it. So
Mm,
this is really a very popcorn.
mm,
It's not as much on the lens, as you continue on the story as she's trying to survive these different situations. Everything is almost each one is like there's sort of like an arc overall, but not. So you could almost pick up at any different chapter for the most part. It's just her on a different assignment and seeing her trying to survive that assignment. But I thoroughly enjoyed it. I thought it was a lot of fun, and I think it's Fantagraphics are the ones that made the edition. I thought they did a phenomenal
yeah.
job with it. So in the little box set, so I'm surprised that not enough people are reading this, or again, that was even in that top 1,000. I had a really good time with it.
Now that you say that, I remember a couple of people, a couple of friends have gotten that series from Fantagraphics, and I just assumed, just by how the art design in that little like slip box set is, that it was just more so of an art book. So I might have to get that, ASAP, because that's something I keep seeing. I'm like, do I want this art book thing? Because I didn't understand it fully. But hearing that now I'm convinced. I think that might be the definitive first purchase for me after we finish this. That's really cool. Moving right along. This is a series from Seven Seas that a lot of people I've seen picked it up and immediately stopped reading it after the first volume, which is kind of tragic. Uh, I was really impressed with the first volume. I thought it was great. I saw a lot of manga tubers online, people on X and Twitter, also, reading the first volume, and then it's going, nah, it's kind of boring. But Colorless. Colorless
Mhm.
is a really interesting series, and I think if people like took their time with it, it would be really good read. I think it's only 7 volumes, but the artwork is pretty solid. But I love the fact that we know manga and comics, older comics, are normally just black and white, right? So I thought it was really interesting that this series by Kent uses the devoid of color to talk about a post-apocalyptic world where color was removed, and then they find these rocks and gems that have color and they can give certain powers, and when that happens the whole panel turns color. So even for like its bang for its buck, you're getting an accidentally colored art series, which is cool. But I thought the story is really good. There's some parts that remind me a little bit about like Fire Force, No Guns Life, um, and I think what people find with the flaws are like it seems like in the beginning the characters are a little bit weak, but obviously as you stick with it for such a short volume series and they're smaller size, they're pretty good. It's really great. I really love it. And the last one, the last 2 volumes were very interesting, a lot bigger. And I just know that a lot of people aren't reading it, and I think it's really good. It's worth it. Colorless.
What did you? So I was one of those people that was hesitant. So
Hmm.
I haven't read it at all. But it was on my radar. Would you say after the 10th volume, did you feel good with the conclusion, or like was it kind of like was it axed, or do you feel like it got what it deserved for the full story?
That's a good question. I think for what it encapsulates, it's pretty good. So like if I wouldn't give it like a 10 out of 10 series, I'd give it more like a 7. Like there's some spots in the middle where you can kind of tell it was kind of like being pushed a little bit in a direction, maybe by an editor or two. Um, not really fan servicey stuff, but some things were put in there, I think, a little bit too fast in that first middle spot. But I think it does well at the end. I don't think it's really rushed. I think it's just that first volume pain that some mangakas have where they're figuring out the pacing, and then once the pacing's figured out, it's kind of an enjoyable ride. But it feels like if it was made into an anime, it'd be maybe an OVA, a simple one-shot movie to kind of encapsulate the whole thing, and it'd be pretty enjoyable. If it was ever to be a movie, I think it'd get like a 8 out of 10 because there's so many cool things you could do with it visually with the choice of color. It's super cool.
That's awesome. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, now it's back on my radar. So my number four is another one that I'm sure an anime eventually will come out for this and it'll be popular. I'm surprised. This is just a newer series we're on. We just got volume 3. And so similar like Trillion Game, this is actually Full Night. So this made my top 10 of new releases for this past year. Following this world where there's no more sunlight whatsoever, just clouds have covered the sun, and it's just complete darkness all the time. So you need oxygen to breathe. So what they found a way where they can put plants inside people, and then those plants can flourish. And then, but it takes about 2 whole years, and you lose your humanity, and now you're a plant forever. So there's
Mm,
that tension of, do I want to die as a human or do I want to live on as a plant? Is that ethical or not? And there's rules and regulations that you essentially have to be dying to have this happen to you in the first place. There's no turning back. And then you're given a large sum of money to live off of and make the best of that last 2 years. So you're seeing people that is a society where either you have a lot of money, you're doing very, very well, or you're
mhm.
extremely poor in poverty. And then there's the tensions of like, taxes are high for oxygen, and you have people like, why are we giving, a lot of money to these people becoming plants and through my taxes, but I can barely even cover my own costs to even allow my kid to go to school or for us to even to eat. And then these people are living the high life. So there's a lot of politics in that and tensions. They did a really good by the third one. I was hooked on there of all of a sudden there was a plant that was not supposed to, but they're killing people. So there's an investigation. So your main character ends up he has something tragic happen to him where he's going to be becoming a plant, but for some reason he has ability that he can talk to the plants and communicate with them, the ones that haven't fully lost their humanity. So he's now on this investigation with the police as they're trying to find all is not supposed to, but one of the plants that's moving around and is killing actual people. And so you're following that what's going on, and then at one point you get to see through that plant's perspective on how they became the way that they are and how they're treated to society. So there's a lot of hierarchical questions on society in general and what's fair, what's not, and so overall, I'm surprised with the 3 volumes that I think it's just outside that top 1,000 right now. So I my guess is more people discover the series. I know it's a lot further on the Viz app. I think over 70 chapters, but I would be shocked if this doesn't get an anime. I could see this doing very well.
I know it's like one of those series like with everyone's talking about Kagurabachi or the Gaichikuda, the trash one.
Hmm.
But and Fool's Night was this is another one. Those three I think came out in a row, and that's the last one I haven't dived into myself. So it's good to hear that. I've seen also a little bit more of that bubbling popping through. So I wouldn't be surprised if your assumption is right that it's going to be a lot bigger sooner than later. So number three, we do have a cross pollination. Talk to my back. That was my number three spot. But I also had a backup just in case because everything else seemed like I hadn't heard you talked about either. But talk to my back. It's fantastic. It's one of those unique series that has like a great historical importance, like you were talking about. But I think it's great. But if I had to give an alternative for a different series too, that also talks about a female perspective, I would recommend Sketchy. Sketchy is about learning the skateboard culture, and it's a lot of female main characters who are kind of reevaluating their life at different points and stages of age and finding the bliss and simplicity of just like learning to skate, learning a new skill, finding a community that's actually closer to who they are as people and listens to them. And it's pretty solid. So if you're not, if you didn't get the hint yet from both of us to get Talk to My Back, offering up Sketchy as an extra one for you. But yeah, those are definitely be my number three.
Well, I appreciate that because now I want to look at Sketchy. I was in the skateboard culture back in my youth days, so now I'm
Yeah.
definitely really interested on seeing that side of things and done well because I haven't really seen too many manga actually take that culture well unless it's I've seen it more as like a side piece
Yeah,
for
yeah.
what others instead of really diving into that. So that's really cool.
And it's not very bro mentality, if you will. It's really there's a good plot and the characters are really likable, real situations in their lives happening and how they find skateboarding as an outlet to kind of decompress and also take time to kind of learn about themselves. Yeah.
All right, so now we're in the top three. Mine is another manhwa, and this is going to sound ridiculous, even a little embarrassing. So I don't, I sometimes I wonder why I like some of these series for the way they are. Uh, so hear me out, everyone. But the villainous turns the hourglass is my number three. I believe this originally was a webtoon series. This is about a gal who is a villainess,
Hmm.
and then at the very beginning of the story, she is executed. And right before her execution, her sister comes to her and essentially shares that I am the true villainess and I made you this way. And it's been my plot all
Oh,
along to get you killed. So she is executed and murdered, and then like these turns the hourglass, she ends up waking up like 10 years before all that happened. And then so now you're following her as she is realized she became the villainess. So now she's trying to become the villainess of the villainess and work behind the scenes of trying to, instead of allowing her sister to really pull the strings, she's now trying to pull the strings on her sister, well, stepsister,
mm.
of course, because a real sister that wouldn't happen, but
Right,
try to
sure,
find a
yeah.
way to make it work. So she has gone away from society as she is going to manipulate things. She knows what happens in the future, and then of course things are now changing, so things are less predictable. So it's interesting as she knows her sister is showing her true colors. She's now trying to change and be even more behind the scenes. So counter moves, the counter moves, shadows, the shadow. So it's interesting seeing, I think, 5 or 6 volumes. I think there's only like 7 total in this, but I've enjoyed the
Mhm.
journey along the way, especially more towards the beginning, seeing her trying to change things up for herself. And then she can change this hour. She has this hourglass that can change time if she needs to, but then there's, of course, a cost to that as well. And so you're seeing just
Sure,
the
yeah.
society going on. And it's one of those things where you realize the future maybe wasn't as great behind the scenes, and the people that you thought were wonderful people aren't really as wonderful, and just
Mm.
cast on that society. So it's interesting also the idea of what would that look like if you, yes, you were a villain, but what if you found out that someone kind of pushed you in that direction and you thought it was by choice, but really not. And now you actually have the opportunity after discovering that, do I really want to go down that path again? Do I want to go down a different path? Or do I want to go down that path, but instead turn a different person in that direction and make it so they're the one that gets executed, not me?
Interesting. Do you get a lot of flashbacks, if you will, to what I guess would you say the present was before? Like, or
Yes.
do you have to do that as a reader yourself? Okay, cool.
Yeah, so she has it. She's like, "Oh, I remember what happened in the scene before," and you'll get a flashback of what
Mm.
happened to her, where even like knowing that something was poisoned or not. So you do get to see different of those things where she was manipulated, where she said things that she shouldn't that got her in major trouble, but found out that she was doing something based off a lie that she was told, not what was really reality.
Cool. I like that. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean the cover doesn't do it justice. You're like, is this really? But I don't know why I'm embarrassed by it, but I really do enjoy it.
Well, nothing wrong with that. It sounds interesting alone, not even withstanding seeing the cover, the art, but the story wise, I mean, that's the same reason with Gantz. You look at the back of some of those Gantz volumes and you're like, whoa, what is this? And then you read the story and that's not even there. Just the manga doing that for whatever sake, but that's pretty cool. I like that. All right. For number two, the greatest love story ever told, in my opinion. And it's Dan to Dan. No, just kidding. That
Oh, I
that's
was like,
definitely doesn't fit.
what?
That's way too high up. No, but truly the greatest story, love story I think ever told is a completed, and this is rare, Denpa release. The Girl with the Sanpaku Eyes.
Mm.
I think it's only 5 volumes. When I first got it, I bought it just out of intrigue because it was interesting. It was, Denpa 2021, so they were on a good release schedule then. And it seemed interesting at the time and healthy, and just checked it out. And it took me a while to read it, actually. It was one of those that I decided, all right, I need something new. I haven't done this. And I picked it up, read the first volume, and I immediately bought the rest. Uh, and also, surprisingly, it's all in color. So I did not expect that whatsoever. looking at the cover, I thought it was really interesting. Um, the colors were great. And then I opened the inside and I was like, wow, these first two pages must be the only color ones like some releases do. And then I kept going and going and going and going, and it's all color. And for that price point too is incredible. But the story is what's the best part. It's about this girl with the sanpaku eyes, kind of like snake looking eyes, who's very nervous. She's very anxious, quiet, introverted to herself. She's been in love with her desk mate to the right of her in school for years, it feels like. And it just really does this wonderful job of capturing this love story of those bubbling feelings of having a crush and then the first steps in that relationship and how the story completes is fantastic. It's so good. I'm so surprised it's only 5 volumes and how it just puts a wonderful bow on top of the whole thing. I can't recommend it enough. I think it's the greatest love story ever told. It does so many great things. The panels are fantastic. There's so many that's just so enjoyable. You know, if you're lucky enough to have a partner in your life and you remember those first moments of nervousness, excitement, that bubbling feeling of love striking you, Cupid's arrow, if you will, you're going to read this and just think about your partner the whole time. That's what I did, you know, and I finished reading it, I think, before I got engaged a year and a half ago, and then reread it again this summer before our wedding that was in the fall. And it's just great. I just can't stop thinking about it. It's a series that I still pick up and just like read a couple different volume. I don't care. I just love everything about it, and I can't recommend it enough. Please, please, please do yourself a favor and get the 5 volumes of The Girl with the Senpaku Eyes. You got to. I demand
Yeah.
it. You got to do it.
I would recommend doing it now because it will be on a reprint after this video. So I've always been on the cusp, and you've shared in the Discord I should pick this up, but now I will. So thank you so much for selling it even better.
Yeah.
So my number two is one that I'm surprised more people haven't brought this up. It had an anime. I don't know if the anime did well or not. This is a one that I feel like I'm reading like Lost. Just the idea of just many things like what the heck is going on, but you're intrigued where you're hooked by wanting to know what happens next. And that is Dead Mount Death Play. There is 12 volumes out for this so far. There are 3 chapters that are out of left field that feel like I understand why this isn't shrink wrapped and doesn't make sense, but there are 3 chapters. But other than those 3 chapters, everything is just a lot more tame, and you don't understand why it's in shrink wrap. This is a reverse isekai series, so this was actually the necromancer for the kingdom, and he's being hunted down, so he decides to transport himself into a new world, and ends up he's now on an our world. So he has magical abilities of necromancy and bringing people back, and then using bones and skeletons for powers, and then everybody else doesn't have those gifts. So he's trying to figure out the society where he just wants a quiet, peaceful life, but unfortunately that, of course, doesn't happen. And there is just every time they bring in like a new character or villain, there's just very interesting, just the world building they did of he can sense darkness. So there's one thing called Lemmings. This guy who just is an assassin killer, and he can see the darkness. He can feel like he's overpowering, but you can't figure him out. And then you have this other person who's a magician who just is extreme. He's trying to figure out if there's magic even exists, but he actually is just an extremely good magician and has these really different tools and everything, almost like a Batman, but for a magician. He has his own. What's he trying to do? Then there's these fireflies, where these people where fires are just randomly happening and they can't figure out what's going on, and they can never figure out who does it, except for there will be a symbol from this person that left it. So there's a lot of good mystery in it where, again, I'm just like, oh, I want to know what happens next. They've done a really good job with that, at least for the first 12 volumes. I was hooked, where I just want to keep reading volume after volume after volume. At the same time, it is an isekai in that sense of a reverse, where we're in this world, and yeah, there's gonna be some zaniness and some ridiculous sometimes, and don't want to spoil what you find out, but you discover like in the towards the beginning that the symbol of his kingdom, their flag, that symbol exists in the human world, And so what's the connection between that? And then people are trying to discover, what does the symbol mean? And then there's some changes with the symbol. And then you also have the police, detectives and stuff. They're trying to figure out what's going on at the same time. One detective was killed, you find out in the beginning, but because this person's a necromancer, he's able to bring this person's spirit back. So he knows things based off of this other detective. You're like, well, how does he know these things? So I've been really intrigued with this.
Yeah.
My guess is the maybe the anime did terrible. This is a series I never even heard of before. And then I think a lot of YouTubers did like the first volume or talk about it. I remember there's videos on it.
Mm.
But sadly, I didn't watch their videos. I just noticed like, oh, people are talking about this thing, and then I was like, well, let me just get a couple of volumes. It's on sale when they're really cheap, and then I was like, oh, I was really intrigued by this. So if you like Lost, the show where you just like what the heck is going on, but
Yeah.
it intrigues you where there's all these connections. I think this is one. It is it's a dark fantasy series, which we don't have too many dark fantasy series really out.
Right. Right.
So I've really enjoyed this again. There's three chapters that should not exist and doesn't even make sense why they exist, but I think it's just fan service for the sake of fan service. But what's interesting, it's like after chapter 30, it's there is no more. So I wonder if it's like one of those HBO shows where, hey, we're gonna be very heavy on the adult content in the first couple of episodes to hook you in, and then we don't have it for the next couple of seasons.
Mm.
But I've really enjoyed this one.
Yeah, that's one series. You're right. I've seen that a lot. I've seen it all over the place, never dived in. So I don't know. That's a good sell. That sounds like a fantastic plot. That sounds really cool to dive into for sure. So moving on to number one, this tragically has no physical release. And I think just before this video, I was talking to you about it too. I think it's the most underrated series right now,
Mm.
maybe of all time. It's fantastic in how it is designed, how it's made. Um, it's called, I'm going to butcher this. That's why I got to look over here at the screen. Tsui no Taimashi Endergeister. And they actually has a prequel series called Versus Evil. The names don't really align, but the story and how they're woven together is also brilliant. Um, so just for all sake and purposes, Endergeister is what I'll call it. And it has to do a little bit with like demon exorcism, but not really. I think that's what it loosely translates to. But you follow this main character who is able to use this, what they call black smoke, to create weapons. And he's a part of like a special operative team that does all these missions against these other assassins, other governments, bad people in the world. You know, anything where like these kingpins are taking over certain areas of the country, they get involved, and it's this unbelievable, well done action. I think it's the best that action has ever been done in manga.
Mm.
There's one scene in particular where you're finding out how the main character got this black smoke from one of the, I think it's like top 5 or top 10 demons in the world that he is now possessed partially under and has the power of. Um, and in the main fight right before he gets these powers, the manga turns into first person. So very interesting because we see everything in the third person point of view. You see the character's profile, maybe a little bit of body language off, but it moves so well when it transitions. The panels, almost like a movie, go from the side and kind of click and zoom into the first person, and then the action actually makes sense,
Mm.
which is really difficult, in a manga to make it that cinematic style anyways, but to really translate the visual cue of going from third person to first person for a fight sequence and then how it snaps back. I think this mangaka has like an unbelievable, um, must have like a cinematic director background, but the way they do their panels. Um, Interesting enough, every chapter also takes from films throughout history. So there's certain characters, like one of the bad guys, the mangaka blatantly says, influenced by Steven Seagal and his karate film. So the main character has elements that look like it. Um, our main character's mentor looks a lot like Clint Eastwood, and he outright says it. There's a lot of good callbacks to famous action films, and actually at the end of every chapter, it says what the chapter was influenced by. Certain fight scenes is heavily influenced by it, but man, oh man, it's such a great series. It's such a shame there's no English release. I think it's only released in Italian for or maybe Spanish, the Panini Press.
Mm.
Um, but it's so good. If you can find it online, definitely get into it. It's fascinating. It's probably the greatest series people have never read.
Wow, that's incredible. The greatest series no one has ever read. So let's go to my number one, which will not be as amazing as that. Um, but it's a series that is about to get an anime, so I think it'll do a lot better. I'm working on my top 30 of all time right now, and I was working on the list, and
Oh,
this is probably in that top 30. And so I was surprised when I pulled it up. This is hovering on outside of the 1,000, and that this is a shoujo series, so I'm not surprised in that sense, as you shared, like with a lot of shoujo series will not get that recognition. But
yeah.
this is Honey Lemon Soda. We're on 7 volumes right now from Yen Press. I think there's over 20 volumes in Japanese for it, and Yen Press only seems to do like one every 3 months or so. So it'll be a while to catch up. But
Mm,
you're following this girl that she was bullied through junior high. So instead of transferring, going to same high school with the same type of people that would be keep on bullying her, she ends up going into a different school altogether. Instead of being, it's more of a school that has kids that aren't as elegant and upper class and don't have as much. But she just wanted to change the school, isn't rated as well. But she needed a different pace, and she ends up, falling in love with this boy with the honey lemon hair, and then you're following her journey as she's coming out of her shell and becoming more independent, and then actually having a good friend group that actually cares about her and will stick up for her. And then you have it where this boy is changing her, and then it flips where she's actually changing him and being a better
mm.
positive influence on him. And you're seeing her gain her independence. So seeing the camaraderie of friendship, I appreciate seeing the different perspectives. I think it different times, at least when I was growing up, I only thought through a male's perspective. So I appreciate seeing a female's perspective on different things. Like, oh,
Yeah.
I didn't have sisters or anything growing up, so I really appreciate seeing that different lens and viewpoint. So Honey Lemon Soda, I thought it was one of the better shoujo series that's currently ongoing right now, and I was actually surprised that this was out of the top 1,000. I thought this would be probably in the 200s.
Yeah, I mean that's a classic. And I remember when they announced that, printing schedule, everyone was so super excited. Were you there in person when they announced that one?
No, not in that one. No.
Um, because again, must maybe it was manga alerts, but when that one came out, I have that first volume. I have not dived into it yet, so that's a really good insight on it because definitely intrigued now. Want to commit to that, maybe push that up my priority list. Um, but I know it's a classic, so I'm also surprised that's not up there. Wow.
All right, so that is our top 10 unrated series. I want to thank you so much for if you've stuck to the end of this video. If you have not already, I want to recommend you subscribing to Mr. Wawoo's channel. Hopefully that will get him to see that, hey, people do want to see more of his videos, and he would start making more videos again. Or I can just continue to beg him to come back on the channel here. Thank you so much. Again, this was just for fun. These are just our take on looking at over the top 1,000. There's easily looking at over 10,000 plus. I'm sure there's things that we could have missed. We would love to know in the comments below. Would you mind sharing with us where we might be wrong? Share with us what is one or two series that you recommend that is outside that top 1,000. And again, for MyAnimeList, that was us looking through. It's out of top 1,000 when it comes to rating as well as popularity. There are series that are rated terrible but are very, very popular, and vice versa. So because that actually made this a little more challenging when we were going through this list. But we'd love to know your thoughts. Again, this is just for fun. Mr. Wawoo, do you have any final thoughts?
Yeah, just want to say thank you to the GTP and everybody here. Greatly appreciate it. This was such a tough challenge. I was going through it, trying to figure everything out and double checking with you too. Like, wait a minute, popularity is so high, but rank is so low, vice versa. There were so many series that were my favorite that I looked at and I was like, oh, wow, this actually does have a bigger following than I had ever thought. Or same Wow, this was rated terribly. I loved it. Now I get why it's on the popular list and not the highest for the rating. But wonderful challenge. Give it a try yourself. Why not? Definitely check it out. But appreciate everything to the GTP and everyone. You can find me anywhere and everywhere, Mr. Wawoo, and happy to engage in all manga, fun stuff like that. And happy New Year to everybody.
Awesome, guys. So thank you so much for watching. We'll see you on the next one.